My sister pushed me down the stairs as a prank. My parents threatened to disinherit me for pressing charges. I ended up in the hospital after my sister shoved me down the stairs during her party, claiming it was a harmless joke. My parents are now threatening to take away my inheritance if I file a complaint. I am 4 months pregnant at the moment. My spouse and I have been attempting to conceive. To be honest, there were times when we thought the wait seemed to go on forever, and then, somewhat unexpectedly, we learned what I was expecting, given all of the challenges we've faced thus far. This pregnancy holds immense significance for us. The fact that we will soon be welcoming our first child into the world makes us incredibly happy. Newton and I decided to be extra careful this time because I've had miscarriages in the past. We made the decision to conceal the pregnancy until we were positive that everything was going according to plan. We also wanted to protect our emotional health. If we lost this pregnancy, we wanted to shield ourselves from having to grieve in public. My younger sister Elle and my parents were unaware of my pregnancy until last week. At times it seemed weird to keep them in the dark, but I also needed the time to think things through. From significant life events to minor triumphs, my family has always been the kind to celebrate everything. I adore that quality about them. We've created a ton of wonderful memories. We've got memories together from over the years, and it makes every occasion special. But I've been a bit distant from the family for the last 4 months. The pregnancy was really tough on me, so I needed time for myself. My younger sister Elle was over the moon when she got promoted at work last week. Last year, Elle's ideal wedding was meant to happen, but at the last minute, everything fell apart. Her ex cheated on her with one of his. The groom didn't even have the grace to show up at the bachelor party the night before the wedding. One of his buddies showed up to break the heartbreaking news that he had made the decision to completely cancel his participation in the wedding. It was really embarrassing and our entire family was startled. It was meant to be one of the most joyful days of her life and we had spent a lot of time getting ready for it. It was a huge letdown. All of her hopes and excitement for her future with this man had been dashed in such a public and harsh manner. Elle threw herself into her career after that. She used it as a way to keep herself busy and distracted from the pain. She's always been driven and ambitious, but her commitment to her work increased significantly following the wedding disaster. So her recent promotion marked a big turning point in her career and personal life. She really wanted me to come, since she wanted to celebrate the occasion with a party. I could tell she really missed having me around. She said she hadn't seen me in a long time. Plus, my parents kept urging me to go. They said it would mean a lot to her, since I hadn't been to the last few family gatherings. I didn't want to let her down, so I finally agreed. I just didn't want to detract from Elle's. I was really happy for her on her special night. I didn't want to take away from it at all. I wanted her to enjoy it, but it was getting harder and harder to hide my baby bump. I wore a long dress that flowed and I even used shapewear to try to hide it as much as possible. I was determined I wanted to make sure Elle's promotion was the main focus of the party. Everything seemed to be going well until I got there. I was starting to feel more comfortable with my pregnancy, but I still had to hide it. My mom noticed my arms and cheeks were a little plumper than usual, but she didn't say anything. I had already thought of how to respond, so I joked that I'd been eating a lot. I was relieved. I was less likely to be caught out about my pregnancy and more likely to be seen as just putting on weight. That seemed like the safer option. As the evening went on I realized how uncomfortable I was. The party seemed to go on forever and I'm not used to staying up late anymore. Newton, my husband, arrived at the party right from work and was enjoying himself. I was grateful that he kept checking in with me to make sure I was okay. Elle and the rest of my family were having a great time. They were dancing in the backyard and doing shots. Seeing Elle so joyful and carefree, especially after everything she's been through, made me glad. However, I began to feel nauseous, most likely due to the heat of the evening and all the greasy food I'd eaten. I found a peaceful seat on the couch. After deciding I needed to escape the boisterous dancing and loud music, all I wanted was to get home, relax my feet a bit, maybe give them a massage, get into bed, and read on my Kindle for a little while. I briefly closed my eyes in an attempt to relax and collect myself. My Aunt Mia sat down beside me at that moment, waking me up. I had fallen asleep without even realizing it. I shook my head when she offered me a glass of wine. She went on to say that I looked pregnant and that my face was nearly glowing the entire evening. I froze, unsure. I didn't know how to respond. Mia is no fool, so I tried to shrug it off, avoiding eye contact and feeling uncomfortable. She asked me directly, "Are you really pregnant?" as her eyes widened in shock. Despite my inner panic, I made an effort to remain calm in an attempt to divert her attention. I shook my head, but Aunt Mia put her hands on my stomach, and her eyes brightened with total conviction. "Oh my God, darling, you're pregnant," she cried. She chuckled and drew me into an. I was a little alarmed and practically begged her not to tell anyone just yet because I didn't think the time was right to make the announcement. However, Aunt Mia dismissed my worries. She reminded me that everyone had been eagerly anticipating this time, hoping that I would become pregnant, and demanded that the family should be informed of this wonderful news. Aunt Mia smiled at me, held my face in her hands, and reminded me that it was a family night, even though I told her it was Elle's night. She told me not to overthink it and that because everyone had come together, it was the ideal moment to share. Everyone was still dancing and partying when Aunt Mia got up and went outside before I could stop her. I saw her, and my heart fell. Aunt Mia captured everyone's interest with all the zeal in the world without wasting a beat and pointed at me and told everyone that I was pregnant. After telling them she had some important news to deliver, there was a moment of stillness while everyone processed Aunt Mia's words, and then everyone in the party burst out in congratulations. My relatives rushed over to me, around me with hugs and shouts of congratulations. They were really happy for me and Newton. They were excited to hear the news, because they knew about my past miscarriages. My parents were so happy, they were crying in celebration of this new chapter in our lives. Many congratulated Newton and gave him hugs as well. I had imagined a more private, intimate event, something modest and unique, something I could share with my family when I was ready. Instead, I was dragged into the spotlight. I saw her standing off to the side, smiling as best she could, but obviously feeling uncomfortable. She avoided making eye contact with me and wasn't participating in the festivities. I was overcome with remorse because I had worked so hard. To avoid situations like this, I went over to her and apologized for Mia's disclosure of my pregnancy. I took a deep breath and asked why I hadn't told her before. I explained that I had planned to make the announcement a few weeks later, when I was more comfortable and prepared. She pursed her lips, shook her head, and murmured, "Whatever." I was surprised by her response and hurt by her comments. I tried to reason with her, but she didn't seem interested in having a conversation, so she moved away after taking a sip of her wine and stopped focusing on me. I spent the rest of the evening listening to everyone's overwhelming advice on being a first-time parent. Meanwhile, she continued to glare at me from the other side of the room as though I was somehow to blame for everything. I felt much more guilty and uneasy after her response. I had an overwhelming urge to go to the bathroom at one point. I stood up and went to the guest bathroom, but it was completely packed. I went upstairs to use the restroom in the main bedroom because I felt like my bladder was going to explode. When I came out, Elle was waiting for me outside. She seemed drunk, and I could tell she was uncomfortable. I tried to apologize again, but she didn't seem to understand. She just rolled her eyes and asked, "Are you?" I was really expecting there to be a hint of suspicion in her voice, and her tone was almost contemptuous. "Of course I am," I said, looking at her while reflexively touching my stomach. Why would I tell a falsehood? I went on to add that everything was extremely strange, particularly since I hadn't even told our mother, with whom I often spoke daily, that I was pregnant. I was becoming annoyed by her incessant interrogation. I attempted to reiterate my justifications in the hopes that she would realize that I had. I decided to keep it a secret. I was shocked by Elle's insensitivity when she said in a callous tone, "Maybe this pregnancy will also end in miscarriage, just like your previous ones." How could she have said such a disgusting thing about my child? I screamed at her. My voice was shaking with fury and hurt. How dare you say such a thing, even though I've apologized multiple times tonight. Your remarks were inappropriate. My voice reverberated in exasperation. Elle said she was upset that I'd taken her attention, especially after everything that happened last year. I reminded her I'd supported her through her sadness, staying at her house for several nights and helping her get over her groom's abandonment. I said I'd never overshadow her and that she should blame Aunt Mia for outing me without my permission if she was upset about the outcome. But Elle kept pointing the finger at I felt it would be better to leave and head back downstairs because I was exhausted and tired of the debate. I needed some time and space to think things through. Elle, who was right behind me, kept calling me a selfish person and stating that I should have just given her a night alone. I chose to ignore her, but just as I was about to head downstairs, I felt a strong shove from behind as I slipped and I tried to regain my footing, but I lost my balance and fell. I grabbed the railing to save myself from falling, but my knees gave way. I ended up sliding down the steps head first. After losing my footing, my instincts took over. I covered my stomach with my hands to protect my baby from the impact. My wrist felt the full force of my fall as my body crashed down the stairs. It was a nasty fall. I felt a sharp, sudden pain in my hands, and I heard something break. The pain was intense and sudden. I collapsed on the stairs and screamed in pain as I struggled with the unbearable pain in my wrist. My surroundings became hazy, but my top priorities were my son and making sure he was okay. My family saw the chaos caused by my fall and my calls for assistance. They hurried over, looking worried and alarmed. In a frenzy, chaos broke out in the room as everyone tried to make sense of what had just happened. Newton, my husband, quickly picked me up and carried me downstairs. I kept saying that Elle had shoved me down the stairs because I was in so much pain. Everyone was shocked. Everyone's attention was on Elle, who stood behind me, silent and with a guilty expression. My husband confronted her, yelling at her for pushing a pregnant woman down the stairs. My mother hurried over and up to Elle, who was shaking her shoulders and asking if she had indeed shoved me. Elle was crying and nodding in agreement, her face hot and distraught. My mother was deeply affected by the realization. Elle then started crying excessively while embracing my mother and accusing her of being intoxicated and acting recklessly. I was in so much pain and shock that I was beginning to pass out. I could hear Newton frantically phoning 911 to summon an ambulance. Through the fog, I could just make out I was in and out of consciousness, and I could see worried faces around me. Everything was a blur, and I was surrounded by sirens, chaos, and frenzied activity. I ended up in a hospital room when I eventually came to. Newton was asleep in a chair next to my bed. My throat was dry, so I woke him up and asked for some water. I asked him what had transpired following the fall. He helped me drink the water. Newton described how the pain had caused me to. I lost consciousness and needed emergency care for wrist fractures. I would have to wear the cast for 4 to 6 weeks while my bones healed. I then asked about the baby. Newton told me that our child was safe after the physician's examination. I felt a wave of relief knowing that our baby would be all right. I was happy to hear that. Newton explained to me that Elle's family was upset. They tried to have her arrested, but the cops only got statements from witnesses because I was unconscious before they could file charges. They still needed my formal statement. Newton grabbed my hands and said I had to report my sister's behavior and put aside my feelings for her. He was adamant, saying that, given my condition, there was no excuse for her to shove me down the steps. I was still in shock, so I shook my head. It was nearly impossible for me to. I still couldn't understand how Elle could have done something so damaging, even though my wrist hurt. I couldn't handle the emotional toll of knowing that my own sister was capable of such harmful behavior. I wanted to talk to Elle first. I told Newton I had to know what had made her do so horrible things so I could get an explanation or at least an apology. I needed to speak with her directly. Newton gave me his phone and dialed her number. I asked my sister directly why she had done what she had done. She replied. Elle let out a long sigh as though the words were hard to release, and then he opened up in a bitter tone. She said, "To be honest, I'm just so sick of you being the center of attention in our family. You have a husband now, you're pregnant, you get to have everything in your life. But last night was supposed to be my night, only yet as usual, you showed up with your pregnancy announcement and hogged all the attention. A defensive tone and pushing you down the stairs, that was just a harmless prank. I didn't even think you were really pregnant at first. I didn't mean for it to be such a big deal." Her remarks were painful and disturbing. It was unbelievable to me that she would put my life in jeopardy by pushing me down the stairs because she didn't want to trust me before I could respond. Elle added, "I've been through a lot with my failed engagement and for you. Just showing up and rubbing your happiness in my face was too much. Next time, I'm sure you'll think twice before trying to overshadow me again." Her answer left me in a state of shock. She was essentially blaming me for her actions and showed no remorse at all. She hadn't even shown regret once. Elle handed the phone to my mother, who had been listening on the other end. She inquired about my well-being. I was unaware that my sister and my parents were still there. I told her I'd broken my wrist but that I and my baby were okay after the party. My mom said she, my dad, and Elle had spent the night at Elle's house because they were worried about me. I said they should have waited for me at the hospital if they were that concerned. My mom said she and my dad had been speaking with Elle. They also said that they thought she hadn't been feeling well since last night, even though other people had told me otherwise. She told me not to report my sister to the police because it was only a foolish drunken error. I was surprised by my mother's request to understand the situation better. I asked her why she was defending Elle when she hadn't even apologized to me. My mother said that Elle was currently dealing with a lot of difficulties. My mother said that Elle had been crying uncontrollably and that I had made her feel ashamed in front of everyone. I reminded my mother that they should first address the fact that Elle had shoved me down the stairs, which was the true problem. My mother began stressing that family is family and that disputes like these occasionally occurred among sisters. She said that Elle had never done anything like this before, but that it didn't justify her current actions. I thought about filing a lawsuit for the broken wrist, but I promised myself I'd work with my dad to make sure it doesn't happen again. I was really annoyed at the time. I told her I'd been unsure what to do before I called her, but I'd already made up my mind after speaking with Elle. I had to give her a lesson. My mother was getting more and more agitated. She pleaded with me to think again before I brought charges against Elle. She said doing so might ruin his career. I informed her. I was pretty annoyed at the time, to be honest. My mother tried to persuade me to bring charges against Elle by threatening to disinherit me if I did. She said it would impact Elle for the rest of her life and create a lasting record. I was pretty shocked by her threat, but I refused to back down. I decided to pursue a complaint against my sister after the phone call. She hadn't expressed regret for what she had done, but I was torn about perhaps just wanted to give you an update on what's been going on. Despite the calls from my parents, my spouse and I have turned off our phones. Newton is pretty upset that my parents seem to be favoring my sister over me. Newton's family and other relatives have also contacted him to show their support. Everyone agrees that it was the right thing to charge my sister. I'm more concerned about my baby's safety now that I've read some of your remarks, and I'm worried that Elle could endanger my unborn child in the future if she were able to shove me down the stairs to keep her away from me and my family. I want to get a restraining order against her. Update 2. Hi there, other Redditors. My sister, who was previously accused of assault, was just sentenced. Since I provided an update last month, my parents paid for her attorney, who was quite good and made a compelling argument. She was placed on probation because it was her first infraction. The judge said that Elle had to pay for my medical expenses, do 6 months of required psychotherapy, and meet with a probation officer regularly. After all the criticism they've been getting from the rest of the family, my parents are still very angry with me, but they're too scared to address me. My parents urged me to protect Elle by not pursuing charges against her, and I've freely acknowledged this to everyone. My parents have received a reprimand. No, not from my relatives on both sides. One thinks Elle's mental health issues are a good enough reason for what she did to me, despite my parents' continued insistence on it for her recovery. I really hope my parents will take her to see a doctor. I've asked for a restraining order after sentencing to make sure she can't come near my family or me again. I don't know how to respond to people who have always thought of my sister as kind when we were growing up. We did have our usual arguments, but I never thought she'd hold a grudge. I've always loved her as my older sibling. I never imagined she'd push me down the stairs in retaliation. I'm just as surprised as everyone else. It's true that those closest to us are it's often the people closest to us who betray us. Update 3. I haven't posted anything here in 5 months. Neither has Newton. We haven't seen or communicated with my parents. I gave birth to my baby 5 days ago. I was released from the hospital, and now Newton and I are giving our newborn the best care possible. I heard a tap on the door last night. I was about to sit down to eat when I saw my mother on my porch. I was surprised because I hadn't expected her to come by. I was surprised to see her there, so I said, "What are you doing here?" My husband was just as surprised as I was, so he moved up next to me and stood guard in front of me. My mother burst into tears, telling me that she had just had to come over to meet the baby. She said that she had heard from some of the relatives that I had given birth, considering everything that had lately transpired between us. She said that her excitement didn't seem appropriate, and she expressed how happy she was. And her father were to be grandparents at last, so we could rejoice as a family. She said that Dad would be coming soon with some wine and baby presents. Newton and I exchanged a look of incredulity. Did my mother truly act as though nothing had happened in the past few months as quietly as possible? I told her that we hadn't communicated in the previous 5 months because she had chosen to side with Elle rather than me. She was standing on my porch, but pretending that we were. We were all on good terms, just because I had given birth. Newton told my mother that the minute she decided not to be a decent parent to me first, she had given up her right to be a grandma. He reminded her that Elle had treated me cruelly, and that he would have beaten her up immediately if she hadn't been my sister. But she had shielded that monster from me because she was a mother. I could tell his remark struck a chord with her. My mother's expression changed to one of rage. She tried to counter by saying that those were matters of the past and that she had done what she had to do. She said we couldn't just remove her and her spouse from our child's life. She said it was unjust that we prevented her from seeing her grandchild. Newton wouldn't accept this. He said we chose who could be engaged in his life because this was our my mother kept saying that she did what she did because Elle had been diagnosed with depression. I was getting pretty tired of hearing this, especially when she kept saying that she felt bad about what she did and was trying to change. She even promised that after my son was born, we would all be able to move on from the past and be a single happy family. I just couldn't believe it. I made it clear that I didn't want that. My mom thought she could just ignore everything and go back to our old way of life, but things had changed. There was no going back. I asked her to leave because I couldn't take it anymore. After everything that had been said, I didn't want to ruin my mood. Just then, my dad pulled into the driveway. He got out of the car with a basket of presents and a big teddy bear. I was too tired to argue with my parents anymore. I couldn't understand why they showed up without warning. Luckily, Newton stepped in and told me to go inside and rest. He promised to handle it. I reluctantly let him. I could still hear their words as I made my way back inside. Newton's refusal to let them both in almost immediately sparked the commotion because he was family. My dad insisted repeatedly that he said he had every right to see me and the baby. My normally calm husband got upset and said they had to leave our land right away. He even threatened to call the police. My dad kept arguing and said he wanted to leave the baby out of it, as if that would make up for everything. Newton was against taking anything from them. He told them we didn't accept their presence and that we would get a restraining order against them if they ever revealed their identities again. His response clearly shocked my parents, especially with a baby now involved. I suppose they thought they could just waltz back into our lives. I was pleased with my husband's handling of the matter after our conversation today. Newton and I have decided to put cameras throughout the house as a precaution. I never want to see my parents again. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.